Good afternoon, one and all, or good morning, or whatever time it is where you are joining us. It is live at the waterhole time with Wild Earth in association with Africam. I will be your naturalist for the next 2 hours. My name is Ben Coley, and as always, I would be delighted to hear from you, your thoughts, questions, comments. Remember, it's live and interactive, so if there is anything that you see or anything that you want to know about, please feel free to send in those messages, and I will do my best to answer the ones that I can do. A very happy World Elephant Day to everybody. We have started off the afternoon at Tower Game Lodge in Madikwe, and I see we do have some elephants in the distance, as well as some zebras and a spurring goose in the foreground as well. So what a nice way to start the day. We'll be expecting lots of elephant encounters today, I would think. Looks like another nice, clear, warm day in most of South Africa, at least, and a very good time over the next couple of hours for these great, big, and wonderful animals to come down and quench their thirst. So who knows what we will see? Yesterday we got into some quite philosophical discussions. It was possibly a bit much for a Sunday. For a Monday morning, we'll probably take things a little bit easier today and just enjoy some of these magnificent live images from our cameras throughout the continent. Remember, we have cameras in Kenya, we have cameras in Namibia, in Zimbabwe, and a variety to choose from all across South Africa itself. So a lovely way to start World Elephant Day with some elephants. Got a nice big cow at the front. I thought she was having a drink, but looks like she's finding some vegetation in there, something nice and soft and moist for her to eat. Well, one of the youngsters is playing in the mud. Fairly typical. The one at the back looks like he's been in trouble. He's sort of a little bit sheepish, keeping to himself or herself. Good afternoon, Penelope Kenyon. Lovely to hear from you as always. I'm sorry, it's a rainy day on the KZN coast. It's lovely where I am at the moment, and certainly the blue skies in Madikwe suggest the northwest of the country is also enjoying some nice stable conditions. But rain is good. We like rain. We moan when rain comes, but without it, we'd be in big trouble. And these elephants in particular will very much appreciate the rain, but we are very much in a dry season now. We've got a few months to wait before we get more regular rainfall, but you never know. The weather is a bit strange this day and age. We've had some rain in Hoedspruit 3 weeks ago or so, which we would very much not expect, but it would just be a passing front that occasionally messes with the weather systems. Oh, what bothered you, girl? Voiced her disapproval, probably at a duck or something that was in her way. Happy Monday, Mercedes Bean, as well. Nice to hear from you. And also to Cat Fan, saying Happy World Elephant Day to everybody. Catherine, it's very hot in Germany. Well, that's good. Well, so it should be. Summer in the Northern Hemisphere. I believe in the UK it's going to get up to close to 30 today. So enjoy it while you can, because it probably won't last, unfortunately, speaking from a great amount of experience. So yeah, enjoy those hot sunny days whilst you can. Work on that tan. Sorry, if you can hear some ambient noise, on the outside it sounds like I've just started a lawnmower. Just going to close my window. Lovely youngster in the middle, probably in sort of mid to late single figures, I would think, around about 6 or 7. Of course, until we know if it's a boy or a girl, it's a bit difficult to say for sure. It looks like a little boy, so generally speaking, boys will be a little bit bigger And girls of the same age don't see much in the way of tusks, though, so maybe more about, I would say, probably about 4 years of age. Looking at him with that size, normally those little tusks start to protrude somewhere around about 3 or 4 years of age, but of course, very variable depending on the genetics of that family grouping. Yeah, I might be closer to sort of 4, 5, 6, but maybe just has small tusks or a late developer. Nice to see there's any sort of scattered around in a fairly large area, but just a small family group. There may, of course, be more, but you would expect them all to have come down to drink at the same time. Such a close-knit society, the elephant breeding herd structure in particular. I'd say not unusual to have a young bull hanging around somewhere on his own as they begin that slow process to separate themselves from their natal herd before they go off and start living a much more independent life. It's middle of the day time is always a good excuse to engage in a little bit of spa therapy, a bit of a mud bath, a bit of a dust bath. Try and keep that thick and beautifully textured skin in good condition, protected against any little ectoparasites and damage from the sun. Sure, what that one at the back is doing, having a bit of a scratch of the thigh, perhaps on a rock. I see a few more people commenting on the weather. Lenny, you said you've had 77 consecutive days of more than 100 degrees Fahrenheit, I hope. Otherwise, I don't think you'd be talking to us if we were still discussing centigrade. And that broke the previous record of 76 days. I'm not sure exactly where you are, Lenny, but yeah, 77 consecutive days of over 100 degrees Fahrenheit is good going. I think. Put those air cons on full. So personally, I'm a big fan of the winter months. It does get a little bit. I don't mind the heat. It's the humidity that becomes a little bit sapping during the height of summer, particularly here in the Lowveld, being closer to the Indian Ocean. We get a lot of humid air that comes in from the ocean around that time of year. There's one having a scratch of his belly. Some good maneuverability on his behalf. It would be lovely to go and investigate that rubbing post in person. It must be beautiful up close, and it will be all polished from years and years of usage from elephants and warthogs and all the other things that come there for a good scratch. I would imagine that one in particular is a popular spot. It does look to be just a very small family group here, whether or not they've been separated from the rest of the group, possibly deciding to come down for a drink and left the others feeding. But normally you'd expect a whole herd to come down together, but herds don't always have to number tens or 20 something individuals. Can be little small family groups as well. And occasionally you will also see just elephants on their own that are cows as well. I've seen it a few times. Yup. The zebra's taken the opportunity to run through the gap in traffic. Particularly when they get very old, they may decide that walking with the herd is not such a good idea and prefer to stay close to more suitable habitats, particularly where there is good access to water that doesn't involve having to travel long distances. And also, very importantly, of course, for nice softer vegetation to protect those aging teeth. We tend to have the opinion that there are plenty of elephants, and if you speak to people, they'll all say that they've probably got too many elephants. But this whole idea of what is too many elephants is a somewhat subjective opinion, I think. But It is worth noting that the global population of elephants at the moment, and though I will give myself a little caveat that you know, all the figures differ slightly and you never know quite how accurate they are, but we're looking at around about the 400 to the 420,000 individuals of African elephants in the wild now, which sounds like a lot, but again, if you compare it to the number of people, it's a very small percentage. The more terrifying thought, as with many of the animals, is the numbers that are dropping. If you go back 50 years or so, they were thought to be well over 1 million elephants living on this earth. So in just 50 years, we've done more than halve the global population through obviously a variety of things. Poaching taken its toll certainly from the ivory trade and the ivory perspective. But as usual, it's just habitat. It's a big animal. They range over large areas. And if they don't, they can cause an awful lot of damage if put in a small place, which is when people think they have too many elephants. But it's important that they have enough space, just like everything else. There is this idea of carrying capacities, which of course is very much a developing, um, what's the word I'm looking for? It changes. A carrying capacity is going to be dictated by a lot of different factors, but ultimately it means someone will come and do a survey of your particular area and say, oh, based on your climate, on your vegetation, on your water, on your food availability and space, your theoretical number of individuals of any given species will be X or Y. Elephants do struggle in drought conditions, that ability to find water. And if we are going to put fences around things, we've got to ensure that there's a sufficient amount of resources there, particularly if we're cutting off old migration routes. There's big old matriarchs who run the herd. They've got exceptional knowledge of where to go at certain times of the year under stresses to find reliable resources. And if we cut off the pathway to them, they have to start that learning curve again. And if they don't know where these positions are or these locations are, of course, that could have disastrous consequences. Kathy, you're asking whether animals get sick after drinking after each other, when things like animals bathe in the water. Um, Not really from each other. No, animals are generally relatively clean. Obviously, there are extreme cases. If there was an outbreak of anthrax, you would have to be worried about spores in and around the vicinity. But animals are pretty good. They'll know if water is unsuitable for drinking. And to be honest, you know, when the animals do go in there, it's mostly just sort of dust and general grime that gets into the water, and that tends to float on the surface. It's not often that an animal will transfer a toxin, as it were, to the water, which could cause others to get sick. And they also have a lot better stomachs in terms of bacteria and enzyme to deal with the stuff that you will find in naturally occurring water sources. Of course, animals have different tolerances to it and introduce something unusual, and it might have a couple of influences. But with animals defecating, urinating, bathing in the water, it doesn't really have a knock-on effect. Your bigger problem is more through actually sort of what we call eutrophication or algal blooms, when conditions mean that certain forms of cyanobacteria or algae really begin to take over an area of water, and that can have disastrous consequences on the oxygenation levels of the water and the amount of sunlight or the amount of carbon dioxide in that water. That certainly can cause problems, and that can cause massive die-offs if it's not treated and not managed well. Okay, I think we are going to try a different location. We're going to head to Rosie's Pan next. So here we are up at Afrikaans camera at Rosie's Pan in Olifants West, and we have another elephant, possibly a second one. I think I can see the tip of a tusk, and certainly some ripples. Some elephants coming in for a bit of a bathe and a paddle, but no, no danger of them causing any problems with the water. Kiara, you're asking whether elephants only protect their young from predators. Well, yes, certainly they'll protect their young from predators or anything else that they deem a danger, including people, and potentially other members of the same species, an overzealous male or a rather boisterous youngster who comes into play a little bit too rough, or another herd perhaps that that they don't know. They will be tentative and very protective of those young, as will every mother from every species. But it's something that we need to um, certainly be aware of. It's one of the things that we try very hard not to do from a guiding perspective, is to inadvertently separate or get in between a mother and its calf. Obviously, it will depend very much on the habituation levels of the animals. We're very fortunate in many tourist areas because of the. This one needs some reverse lights, I think. Because of the good level of respect that is shown to these animals by high quality guiding and ethics. They are incredibly tolerant of the vehicles at times, but you always must be aware, because just like us, some days we wake up on the wrong side of the bed and we're a bit grumpy. That is quite possible for an elephant as well. We don't know what the current situation is, what happened last night, if they were harassed by lions, for example. They might be slightly more stressed than normal, but it's always a very, very good piece of advice. Don't get in between a mother and her young in any species. But certainly it's not where you want to find yourself, particularly with an elephant. Naomi, and you're asking about the size of a habitat. Well, it's very. I can't give you a figure because there are so many different factors. You have to remember, elephant is a large animal. It has very, very large nutritional requirements. Oh, pool party time. They need a couple of hundred liters of water every day. They need 200 to 300 kilograms of food every day. So I'm basing this on a big bull. Obviously, females and calves will eat less, but they'll be there in greater numbers. So it is very difficult to give you a figure, certainly, but they need to have enough space, certainly. And elephants, they do move over big distances. They don't hold territories. They're not like rhinos or like lions where they defend an area. So you might have 3 elephants, you might have 300 elephants in an area. But one of the problems we have is by having artificial water points that attracts animals to an area, and then because those water points are there all year round, they don't need to spread out as much as perhaps they should do. But as a generalized rule, the bulls will roam over much larger areas. The herds not so far and wide because they've got little ones with little legs and they get tired. So if they can find a suitable area, they will stay within it. So I can't unfortunately give you a figure because there are just too many variables depending on your geology, on your climate, on your vegetation type, your water availability, etc., etc. Oh, and then there were none. That was a very quick dip from those elephants. Came in, had a quick drink, a quick paddle, a quick lie down, and then off they go. Okay, well, it seems the elephants have moved on from Rosie's pan, so let's head back down to Madikwe or up to Madikwe and Tau again. See, Avis, you're asking how long is an elephant's trunk in comparison to its front legs? Well, again, I feel like I keep sitting on the fence with the answers to these questions, but it's a very difficult question to answer because an elephant's trunk is almost like a concertina. We see it in its sort of relaxed state, like a coiled spring, but just due to its the mechanics of it all, an elephant is able to stretch its trunk much, much longer than you would think. If you've ever seen those pictures of elephants reaching up into the tops of trees, even in when they do stand on their back legs, sometimes very famous up in Mana pools for elephants doing that. So it has the ability to stretch out a lot longer than you would think. But an elephant at rest, you will normally find that if it's got its head held in a normal position and just lets the trunk dangle down to the ground, there might be about a foot or so of it that is laying on the ground. So again, depends on the size and the age of the elephant, of course, and you get some that have higher shoulder heights than others. So it's a very difficult question to give you a specific answer, but in its relaxed state, it probably sort of the equivalent of 1.5 legs, perhaps, in terms of height. Interesting to see that one wildebeest to the back doing very much a sort of a prancy, dancey strut around the place. You don't normally see that. I can only assume that that is a territorial male or a male trying to establish dominance in terms of the way that he's moving. You don't often see that from wildebeest. Has been a little bit of activity. We saw some chasing around, but yeah, that was quite an unusual sort of stride pattern that he had there. It was very much a prancing trot. So I'm assuming that that was some sort of dominancy type behavior because the other ones seem to be running a little bit more chaotically. Interesting to see. So yeah, Ava's good question about the trunk, but you can see there sort of it also depends where are you going to consider the front leg to stop because of course it goes up into the shoulder, which is much higher up, sort of level with the ear. But normally, if an elephant say is resting, it'll be resting maybe about a foot or so of its trunk on the ground, but it can stretch out. I wouldn't say double the length that you can see there, but not far off. It's incredibly elasticated because of all those bands of muscle that give it 360-degree rotation. And Cat fan, you're also mentioning, yeah, so one of the let's say downsides or one of the knock-on effects of having elephants is the destruction of taller trees, certainly. If elephants are moved into a new area, they will obviously capitalize on the good stuff that is available there. And as you mentioned, marula trees do get hit quite hard by elephants, particularly during the summer months when they are fruiting. The elephants do love marula trees, that's for sure. And there is a bit of a conservation push to try and protect these larger trees. It's not unusual to go to reserves and find sort of wire wrapped around the trees, or as you mentioned the other day, sort of sharp rocks placed in a circle around the base of the tree to start try and dissuade the elephants from getting too close and being able to push them over or break them. You often find with marula trees that they do snap somewhere along the trunk if they are being shoved by a big elephant. because they have a very, very strong taproot, so they don't normally uproot themselves. And of course, that does have a knock-on effect for things like nesting sites for birds. It's one of the problems for ground hornbills, for example, that only use natural cavities in trees for nests. If the elephants push them over, then there's not so many suitable nesting habitats. Same thing for sort of vultures and eagles. But on the flip side, it is creating microhabitats for a lot of other animals, the smaller things, the reptiles, the amphibians, the arthropods. They will benefit from an elephant knocking over a tree. So it's rather depends on your stance, I suppose. But we do describe them as a keystone species or ecological engineers. They do have an ability to change the vegetation type in a particular area, and that's why nature's all about a bit of a balance. Whenever you get elephants moving into a new area, there will be an initial period of destruction as they sort of find a natural balance, and then everything should, assuming they have the access to move freely, balance itself out. Once they've eaten everything there, they'll go somewhere else. That gives that area a chance to recover. Unfortunately, the problem is they often don't have a chance to move to new areas or don't need to because they are supplied with all the resources they need in a particular area. Okay, it sounds like there might be some more elephants back at Rosie's Pan, so let's flip back across the country to the east to Rosie's Pan. The next wave has arrived. Some synchronized mud tossing going on there. Camilla Jorgens, you were enjoying the little pool party earlier, and this one again. You're asking how deep the waterhole is. Well, I've personally never paddled in this one. I have been to Oliphants West, but I've never actually visited Rosie's Pan in person. But I think the best indication of its depth is there from what you can see. So it comes up to about the halfway up the elephant's legs, I would think, in the middle. So I'm going to guess that's around about um, 60 centimeters or so, maybe a little bit more, 70 centimeters in the middle. But yeah, that's the best gauge we've got is measuring it against the height of the elephant itself. But elephants are able to swim, don't forget. They have been recorded swimming kilometers and kilometers in between islands in certain places. They quite happily cross channels. They've got a built-in snorkel, so they are quite capable of swimming and they're relatively buoyant. They will float and they will sort of do a sort of kind of a doggy paddle stroke, really, like a dog would in the water. So more than capable of properly swimming, which is a bit of an alien concept to think of elephants going for a proper full-on swim, but yeah, it does happen. Yeah, I confirm you're right. There's a lot more going on. We tend to, as humans, be sort of very much cause and effect. Lots of elephants, they broke the trees, let's remove the elephants to fix the trees. But that in itself will cause other problems. You do need to have elephants. If you don't have elephants, then you're going to end up with a much more heavily vegetated area. Nature is all about balance. The problem is that we don't think in terms of nature's timescale. We have a much shorter timescale. If you yourself go and buy a game reserve and you want to stock it with animals and have a successful tourism business, then you expect to see pretty quick returns and you expect everything to balance out very regularly. But the world goes through cycles, it goes through phases, it takes time for changes to be implemented, and what may look like initial destruction could actually be a better thing from a long term. So that's often the problem we have. We tend to think in very, very short timescales, whereas nature works over much larger periods of time. So an elephant population in a particular area may well grow steadily if they've just been introduced to it and they have access to all the resources needed. But nature is far better than we are as people at balancing. We tend to just keep reproducing regardless. Whereas nature, we can see it in regular sort of population dynamics of birth rates and things. You'll find in areas where there's plenty of space and plenty of resources, the birth rate of certain species will increase. When the availabilities of resources gets smaller, then the birth rate also declines as well. And because of the natural cycles of weathers and things like El Nino phenomenons, every sort of 10, 20 years or every 50 years, you can go back and look through history, there'll be a die out of a particular species that is struggling under those circumstances, normally to do with the climate, rainfall, or drought, or flood. Nature has a very good way of righting the balance, but it just takes a little bit longer to take effect sometimes. It's particularly the availability of artificial water points or the availability of water in general is probably going to be your biggest factor in determining the distribution of elephants. We see it regularly within tourism areas. If you have a cluster of lodges all in one place and they've all got water holes because they're trying to attract wildlife to their lodges so that guests can enjoy those wonderful views, then those animals are not forced to go very far. They stay in a particular area and they can cause devastation. I've seen it in reserves where you have sort of two or three lodges. They're all clustered around a particular area, all got their own water. And it looks like, it's just utter devastation within a very concentrated area in terms of the trees. But if you go further afield from those areas, then you get much more sort of varied vegetation. So from an ecological management point of view, oh, excuse me, I've just swallowed a fly. I'm just going to put myself on mute and have a drink. Sorry about this. Right, doing my bit for population control of the insects, but plenty of protein in an insect. So not sure what that was, but it was very tasty. So rotating water holes, closing water holes off, opening new water holes, ensuring you don't have too many in one place, all very, very important factors. Okay, well, again, it seems the elephants at Rosie's Pan are quite content to come in, have a quick drink, and carry on. So let's head over to Tempe Elephant Park. I imagine there'll probably be some Ellies there. Yep, more elephants. All the elephants are out for World Elephant Days, and even the impalas are appreciating the elephants. You actually see a lot of this fresher elephant dung that we can see in the background there is very reddish in colour, which is what you would expect at this time of year, because a large proportion of their diet or their diet sort of changes throughout the year in response to the availability of what there is to eat. So generally speaking, during the summer months, you'll find the dung to be a little bit more blackish in color because they'll be eating up to 70 or 80% grass. And grass has silicates in it. And for some reason that's beyond my level of understanding in terms of internal biology and gastrobiology, if that's a word, that tends to um, give the dung a more of a sort of a darkish, blackish color. Whereas if you've got a diet rich in tannins, which will be this time of year because elephants in particular, there's not so much grass available, so they're eating a lot more tree-based fodder, so things like the cambium layer, which is that inner layer of a tree's bark. Lots and lots of tannins present in there, and also in the leaves of many trees as a defense mechanism that the tree has about from being overbrowsed. And that manifests in a lot more of a sort of a reddish, rusted colour to the dung, which we can clearly see here. So that's to be expected this time of year. But that ability to, or that habit of eating bark off trees is another one of the problems, known as ring barking. So if an elephant wants to strip the bark off 360 degrees around a tree trunk for the majority of tree species, that will be the end of that tree. It will still be able to bring water from its roots up to the leaves and to the rest of the tree, because that happens in what's called the heartwood, which is the sort of outer layer of the solid part of the trunk. That's where the xylem is contained. It's the transportation system that only moves in one direction from the roots up to the rest of the tree. The bit that suffers is the phloem, and that's what the elephant is after. So, after the process of photosynthesis in the leaves with the chlorophyll, the sugars, the glucose that is created there is circulated in all directions by that tree to allow for growth. But if you cut off that cambium layer, if the tree is ring barked, it's ultimately unable to send that energy through to the roots. The roots are not getting enough sugar, they're not getting enough energy, the roots will die, and then ultimately the tree will die. It's not just about a lack of water from the roots, it's more actually to do with the energy being circulated to those organs, if you want to call them that, in the roots. Marulas, though, are one of the trees that can survive a severe ring barking from an elephant. They do heal themselves quite well, so they have a better chance than many other trees. I was in a reserve recently where elephants have only sort of been introduced over the last few years, and the devastation, particularly to the knobthorn trees, was very, very apparent. Lots and lots of dead, sort of skeletal trees littering the landscape, like monoliths. There makes for some great subjects for photography against sunsets and starry skies. But you can really see the devastation there. But again, that's what happens when an area is opened up. Elephants come in, they've overutilized that area, they've now spread out, and hopefully the younger trees will now have a chance to grow and replace that niche being vacated by the older trees that have been destroyed. All about balance and time. Okay, it seems none of our elephants want to hang around today, so we're going to zoom all the way up to East Africa to Africa's Old Donyo waterhole. A lovely big gathering of zebras. A dazzle of zebras, as we should probably say. Definitely one of my favourites. They're just so interesting to look at, particularly when they're all gathered together and you do see that dazzling effect. Very hard to pick individuals out of that group. Creates that optical illusion. Zebras have also been known to eat the cambium layer of trees. I've seen it in person and seen a lot of evidence of it in particular reserves in drier areas if they are also struggling to find enough nutrition in the grass that is available. Generally speaking, of course, they are what we call bulk grazing animals. I have seen elephants chewing on trunks of smaller trees, particularly in this one particular area. They seem to be targeting the large fruited bush willow, the Combretum zaire. Why it was that particular tree, I don't know. Possibly there was something happening at that particular time of year. But interesting to think that even zebras will also eat the cambium layer of a tree. And if you ever are lucky enough to see an elephant ripping off the bark of a tree, once, particularly something like a marula tree, once the elephant has left and you are very confident, of course, the area is safe. If you actually go and take a piece of that cambium layer yourself and put it in your mouth and chew it, you'll get moisture from it, and you'll even taste a sort of a sweetness as well. It's almost like sort of sugar water. So definite proof that there is good stuff to be had there. Catherine, you're jealous of all these animals having a pool to jump into. Yes, you should definitely get yourself a pool, but as you've rightly said, possibly without all of the hippo poop and buffalo and elephant and whatever else has decided to defecate in there. Although it's probably good for your skin, I just wouldn't suggest drinking it. Lovely to see some eland as well. Golden eyes, yes, you're right. We're so fortunate now to have access to so many different cameras to see all the different landscapes, to see the different topographies, to see the different bird life and the different animal life, and even if we're lucky, some sort of reptile and insect life as well. To be able to give you such a large cross section of the diversity of African wildlife and vistas in general is very, very special. So very nice to see nice big groups of zebras here in the Lowveld, just because it's more dominated by savanna woodland and a lot more sort of tree areas than necessarily areas of more open grassland, which would suit a grazing animal like a zebra. We tend to get rather sporadic, small groupings of zebras, the harem social structure that we often mention. So one stallion and four, five, six mares together. It's not often you see big herds numbering sort of any more than 20 or so in the Lowveld. If you go to certain areas of Kruger, you're more likely to see more zebra, particularly, for example, around the central part of Kruger, around Satara. It's a different geology there, what we call gabbro sills. Gabbro as a type of rock, it's very fine grained and it's not particularly good for large trees. So you don't generally have far more open grassy areas where you'll get bigger populations of zebras because that's where they will be attracted to based on their requirements. But in the greater Kruger areas, so there are little sort of grassy openings, but it's dominated really with more sort of scrubby tree areas, what we would consider savanna. And it can't support massive populations of zebras in one area. So you tend to get quite fragmented, isolated groups. And then add that to the predator populations in those areas, which is often very, very high. And there is no greater controlling mechanism for an animal than having a surplus of its predator. So yeah, I've even worked in places where if you see zebra, you call them in on the radio because people are just as keen to tick off zebras and giraffes and things as they are to see the fabled big five animals as well. So a very, very iconic species. Okay, we're doing a whirlwind tour of our locations, it seems. We're going to go right the way down now to the Eastern Cape to the Mantis Founders Lodge. Ah, and what a treat! A beautiful white rhino bull having a drink. Those ears constantly moving around like giant radar dishes, picking up sound in front and behind. Of course, their eyesight not particularly good, although I think better than a lot of people give it credit for sometimes. But those ears so important for situational awareness and knowing what is around you. Very special to see. You clearly see that enlarged hump just behind the neck, what we call a nuchal hump, particularly obvious on a white rhino. But don't have it. You go down to drink, you'll see that the hump will become less apparent because it's basically a great big ball of muscle. That head is so heavy, the weight of the skull, just the shape of that elongated skull that they've got, the weight of the horn. Takes a lot of effort and a lot of muscle to lift that head up. And obviously, from their natural grazing or position as grazers, holding their head low, you see how that hump has almost disappeared now. When they lift the head up, you can see almost looks like a camel's hump. Whereas on a black rhino, you won't see that nuchal hump. It's not really the same because their natural position is to hold their head up a lot higher. It's a lot smaller. It's a lot lighter because they will be feeding on the leaves and on the twigs. So their physiology is designed to occupy that particular niche. And again, it will also be manifested in the dung coloration we were talking about. White rhino dung is generally relatively blackish in color because of those silicates. Black rhino dung, ironically, is generally more orangey red in color because of the amount of tannins within their diet of eating twigs and leaves. Excuse me, just still digesting that fly from earlier. Rebecca Bishop, you're enjoying the view. Yeah, very, very special to be able to see this. And Tanya Rousseau also enjoying the views here from Mantis Founders Lodge in the Eastern Cape. Cookstories, yeah, this is the perfect camera position to get some lovely views at eye level. It's always nice from a photographic perspective. You can be at the same level as your subject. It just makes for a far more natural and impactful image. Oh, something's bothered him. See the tail has come up. He saw his head go up, heard or smelt something. Tail curled up, normally a sign of stress, and made a quick exit. I wonder if something else is approaching. But definitely something bothered that rhino. Maybe we'll be super lucky and get some sables coming down for a drink. We do sometimes see those at this camera as well. It's generally speaking, not really phased by an approaching fellow herbivore. And a speckled pigeon, lovely. beautiful markings when you look at them up close, like pigeons and doves, the Columbidae family, we tend to just sort of dismiss as oh, another pigeon or another dove. But like most things, if you actually just take the time and really look at them, there's some really, really beautiful things out there in the animal kingdom that we sometimes take for granted, including the Egyptian goose. Also lovely markings, particularly those sort of iridescent wing patches that they have when you see them in flight. Bath time. And with all the lovely different shades, you've got greens, you've got greys, you've got some turquoisey blue colors, obviously the vibrant red in the patch around the eye, that little white eye ring around the red, the little spots, lots and lots of very clever pigmentation going on within those feathers. And you can see all the different structures of feathers as well, lots of different types of feathers on a bird. Different structures for tail feathers, for flight feathers, for down feathers, for things that are called phyllo plumes. There's lots of different category of feather or designs of feather that all go into making that bird as aerodynamically effective and efficient as possible. So notice I mentioned this the other day, but notice when the pigeon has a drink there, hopefully we'll see him again. When we see most other birds have a drink, they scoop water into their beak and then they have to put their head back in order to swallow it because their beak doesn't make a proper seal. But pigeons can pretty much, or pigeons and doves can use their beaks a little bit like a straw and they can suck the water directly up without having to put their head back to swallow. There was a little antelope that we just saw a very brief view of, possibly a hartebeest or sure, just the tip of its horns we saw momentarily. It's like a game of hide and seek going on here. Well, I think we've got a female and a male. Look at the way the male on the right there has just sort of puffed his throat up. Possibly a little bit of a breeding-based greeting, or another male, possibly a dominance display. There is no dimorphism in pigeons and doves. You can't see any difference in the coloration. But the way this one puffed up his throat leads me to think this is definitely a boy pigeon. Oh, the young sable. Hello. Oh, a beautiful bull coming in now. Look at those beautiful scimitar-like horns. Very special camera. This get to see rhino and we get to see sable, two things that we don't see at any of the other cameras. Computer enthusiast, you're asking where do pigeons originate from? I honestly have no idea. They've been around for, I think it's fair to say, longer than Homo sapiens. I'd have to go and do some digging in terms of sort of the fossil record to see if we can find out anything more about their evolutionary pathway. But I know there are records of pigeons from Egyptian times. There are records of ancient people eating pigeons and catching pigeons, but quite where in the world they originated from, that I couldn't tell you. Maybe the sable will tell us. Okay, everything today seems to be quite happy to come down for a drink and then swiftly disappear. Everybody's a little bit camera shy today. Okay, well, I think we're going to leave Founders Lodge, but that was a lovely little visit. We're going to go up to Victoria Falls. And some more birds, this time some vultures. Also enjoying a little bit of a drink. Wouldn't be surprised if we see one have a bath at some point as well. They are much cleaner birds than they're often given credit for. See, Mindy Tillipau, you're asking why, or if we could talk a little bit more about why birds bob their heads when they walk, particularly you see it in pigeons. It's nothing to do with balance, it's to do with their vision, really. A couple of reasons. Well, one, don't forget, like most predated upon birds or non-predatory birds, just like with antelope species, they've got their eyes on the sides of their heads. So by bobbing them around, it just gives them a little bit of a better view because they struggle to see what's directly in front of them. Um, but also just because of the structure of the eye, if they walked without bobbing, everything would be a little bit of a blur. So they sort of lock their vision on one thing, by which time the body has moved forward slightly with the stride, and then they have to move their head to catch up with the stride that they're in. So it's also about just sort of locking things in position for a moment or two, or a few milliseconds, so that they can process that material and then carry on. Otherwise, it would be all moving too quickly, and so everything would be a bit of a blur. We've got some white-backed vultures here, the larger ones, so the one still remaining on the left, and then the smaller ones are the hooded vultures. There's a laughing dove as well. Seems to be having a dove-orientated afternoon, but it's a little bit unusual, a bit different. Oh, that's interesting. That's not something you see every day. What we would consider allo grooming, really. One potentially cleaning the feathers of another one. I don't think it's necessarily a reciprocal arrangement. I imagine it is just a little bit of opportunistic behavior from the one on the left. And the other one said, "What are you doing? Cheeky." Yeah, you wouldn't normally that's something we normally expect to see only in things like primates, or possibly in impala, obviously very well known for it. But yeah, not so much allo grooming in between mates, potentially so. But I think that one really was just taking the opportunity. The other one had its wings spread, and that one was having a poke around for any little mites or other parasites that might have been in and amongst the feathers. Computer enthusiasts, you say you've got mourning doves and pigeons where you are? Yep. We also get mourning doves where I am, but say lots of different dove and pigeon species found in southern Africa, most common being the previously known Cape turtle dove, which has now been renamed the ring-necked dove in light of that little sort of black arc that runs around the base of its neck. We get red-eyed doves, we get laughing doves, we get mourning doves, namakwa doves, the emerald spotted wood dove, and yeah, speckled pigeons, pigeons, rock pigeons, feral pigeons. And before somebody asks what's the difference between a dove, and a pigeon, from a semantics or a taxonomical perspective, I have looked, and the answer is very little. It's just very much a sort of a division of size. So wood doves generally the smallest, then next up would be the doves, and then next up would be the pigeons. But there's no sort of hard and fast rule for that naming procedure. nice to have some up close and personal views of these hooded vultures, but I think we're going to move all the way across now to the western side of southern Africa into Namibia to Okakoyu's waterhole. Yeah, more elephants having a swim. Looks like we just missed the majority of the herd. You can see them streaming off. I wouldn't be surprised if these are two young boys, say, beginning that separation process, that development of independence. They'll follow, but in their own time. Oh, sorry, everybody. We obviously had a bit of a signal issue there, so we've zoomed right the way east across the country to Tembe Elephant Park. Another beautiful bull enjoying a drink. Stephanie, the different soil colours that we've been seeing as we visit all these different locations, there's a mixture of factors that can account for soil colour. Ultimately, it's going to come down to the type of rock in that area which has weathered away to create the soil, which happens obviously at a very, very slow process over millions of years. It's happened to build up to what it is now. So the mineral content of those different rock types Also, the presence or lack thereof of certain minerals like iron generally gives a more reddish color. Leached soils will be much paler in color. Clay-based soils will have a little bit more of a gray. Calcium-rich soils will be whiter. So a lot of it's to do with, ultimately to do with the bedrock of that area or whatever it is from a geology perspective, which has created that soil. Um, and that will manifest, the color will be manifested by the presence or lack of particular minerals within the soil. And that will also have a knock-on effect of the color of the animals that you see, particularly for things like warthogs, rhinos, elephants, things that like to roll around in the mud. Their general coloration will be dictated by the soil as well. So up in Madikwe, it's a very reddish coloured soil in a lot of the areas. And there you'll find that the elephants generally are more sort of rusty in colour, but it's just an illusion caused by their habits of spraying themselves and covering themselves in mud. It's also considered to be the origin of the whole white rhino, black rhino naming debate. Of course, the most sort of classic story told is that white rhino got its name from the original word vite, meaning wide, referring to that wide mouth designed for cutting grass like a giant lawnmower. And then it was misinterpreted by the English when they came through to those areas and started documenting things. The naturalists, as opposed to white, they heard white. And then when they found a different species, it made sense to call it black. There are suggestions that that is not actually the case. That might be one of those, let's say, wives' tales, but misinterpretations of history. There is just an equally well accepted suggestion that the first person to ever actually sort of officially document and record white rhinos to the masses from a more scientific perspective was a British naturalist by the name of William John Burchell, who you might be aware of. We have a Burchell starling, a Burchell zebra, a Burchell sand grouse. He named quite a few things. And he was also apparently the first person to sort of note white rhino and study the white rhino, and that where he first found them, somewhere in the Northern Cape, I think it was in an area anyway that was quite rich in calcium within the soil, which led to a very whitish, pale coloured soil. With the rhinos having to roll around in the mud, there's a very good chance that when he first saw and documented these amazing animals, they were very whitish in colour, but due to the soil color and the mineral content within the soil as opposed to the skin color itself. Elephant has displaced this nice little family of Egyptian geese and goslings. Computer enthusiast, you thought your ears were big, but nothing compared to this elephant. No. Um, how wide are his ears? Well, it's difficult to say, but they're probably a good sort of meter and a half by meter. If you were up close and actually could examine them, obviously, again, differing depending on the age, the sex, and genetics, but much larger ears than the Indian elephant, again, because of the more oppressive heat out here in Africa. Of course, the ears very important for thermoregulation, flapping the ears, cooling the blood, and that thin skin and those veins very, very close to the surface. Acts just like a car radiator. So very large ears to help keep cool in the warm temperatures. Not sure what he's eating there. He might have dug up a little root or a tuber of something. So he found something hidden under the mud there, something nutritious. Although you also do get geophagia as a practice as well, so the eating of soil. So I've seen that in Madikwe quite a few times. So we get a lot of underground sort of roots and tubers and things, and that's very important source of nutrient and moisture during the drier months. A lot of antelope that do the same thing. The steenbok, the gemsbok, all well known for digging up roots and tubers to supplement their diet. Oh, Richard Cooper, I'm glad you're enjoying my calm narrative. Thank you. But it feels like a very calm day. Not too much hectic behavior being seen today, but yeah, just a good excuse to sit back and, as you said, to be drawn to the channel and just enjoy the wildlife for what it is. It's really special. And it's good sometimes just to sit and watch and drink it all in. Very soothing. Also nice to see some palm trees as well, something you'd normally sort of associate with beaches as opposed to water sources in Africa, but they're just to the left of the elephant, who's enjoying a good scratch. It's what we call one of the Lala palms. We have two main species of palm trees in southern Africa, we have the wild date palm and the lala palm, but very important um, from a sort of a local community perspective for weaving things like baskets and for mats. And also the fruit produces something very similar to the quite well-known vegetable ivory. So it's sort of the seed of the fruit can be polished up and carved and has quite a lot of good ornamental value. So vegetable ivory as well as elephant ivory. It's also used to make wine as well. Lala wine that you can get locally. And there's most definitely an ecological or evolutionary link between the palms and the elephants. The elephants do enjoy the fruits of the palm trees, particularly if you go up into northern Kruger, you'll find a lot more of them there because there's a very healthy elephant population up north as well. So, like with most fruits, the elephant will eat that fruit, digest most of the pulp and the good stuff, and then the seed will pass through the stomach. And when the elephant deposits its dung, it will also deposit those seeds, and it's a perfect way for that tree to transport its genetic offspring somewhere away from the parent tree, so there isn't direct competition between the two for those resources, but not unusual at all to find evidence of young lala palms sprouting from old piles of elephant dung. So another reason that elephants are so important, they're such a major seed distribution agent for countless species because of their very, very varied diet, and good for fertilization of the soil in general as well. Not to mention microhabitats within that dung for all manner of arthropods. Of course, the fabled dung beetle that we know and love so well. And it was 2 days ago we were watching some baboons at Tau, and they were sort of cracking open elephant dung and poking around inside, making use of that as a little food storage for arthropods to snack on. We see mongoose doing it. We see a lot of birds doing it as well. So yeah, lots of elephants means lots of elephant dung. That means lots of nutrient recycling and seed distribution and microhabitats for many, many other organisms to benefit from. Desiree Gunter, I'm glad you're finding this beautiful. It feels like a peaceful day. It's a good slow start. It's Monday after all. We don't want to expend too much energy on the first day of the week. And I think now hiding behind this lovely weeping Bourbine, one of the centerpieces, the features of this lovely waterhole at Tembe Elephant Park. And if you were to drink too much Lala wine, well, it's a good thing to have a Bourbine close by because its bark has been used in some traditional hangover remedies or bubbleless remedies, as we would say out here in South Africa. I don't know how true it is, but so it is said. The name Weeping Bourbine comes from its flowers that drip nectar. Beautiful red flowers the right time of year. And also well known that the seeds of the burra bean are used as a coffee substitute. That's where the name burra bean, farmer's bean, comes from. That was said during the Boer War, when there was a bit of a shortage of coffee. The seeds could be collected and then dried out and roasted and ground up to make a relatively acceptable coffee substitute by all accounts. Not something that I can comment on. I know people, I've been with people who have done it and tried it, and I think they said it was just about acceptable, but I'm in the minority of people who despise coffee and do not like drinking coffee, so I'm the wrong one to ask, but that is where the weeping and the bourbeen comes from. Nice, just a little bit more greenery down here in KZN than most of the other locations. Of course, and they're more next to the ocean, a little bit moister environment. These trees looking a little bit more succulent than some of the other areas. And of course, access to nice regular groundwater makes a big difference. Yeah, well, that was a lovely little visit to Tembe. Let's head back up to Kenya and Oldonyo's waterhole. Ah, the lovely group of giraffe coming down for a drink. And another one of these in the background that rather confused me the other day. Seen oryx up here, but I've since learned that we do get the fringe-eared oryx in this area. A little bit of urinary analysis going on the right. And there's that classic pose of the Flehmen grimace. That giraffe engaging his organ of Jacobson, vomeronasal organ, and analyzing all the hormones within the urine from that other individual, trying to find out all that, I always say species specific information, because if a elephant came up and tried to analyze that giraffe's urine, it would still just smell like giraffe urine. They lack the sufficient programming or the right software to decode those hormones that are specific to a giraffe. They're very much a species-specific behavior. It looks like all females but one male. Obviously, potentially got a whiff of something interesting and has attracted him to this group. And now he's trying to figure out where did that nice little pheromone come from. Although he seems to be less than enthused, I have to say. Maybe he just saw an opportunity. We normally know if a male has honed in on a female who does seem to be in reproductive status, he will follow her around very close by, or just almost walking in her footsteps, trying to persuade her that he is the man for the job, and also to keep any other males away from trying their luck in that situation. It's a very cool front-on shot of this giraffe having a drink. Incredible tension in those legs. The waterhole's looking a little bit low. I wonder if that's why we haven't seen very many elephants here over the last few days. If there's a flow problem with the water, because this is pumped, this water, it's kept topped up, but it's definitely a lot lower than we have been seeing it. Now, whether that's a choice in terms of waterhole rotation from a conservation management perspective, or whether there is just a more of a technical issue, I'm not sure. But let's hope that they get it sorted. That might explain why we haven't seen very many elephants here over the last 4 or 5 days. I'd say water in relatively short supply in this area or in this reserve, the Chulu Hills. There's no perennial rivers, no big dam systems or anything like that. So it's generally just runoff from the rains and little seasonal pans. So these watering holes are very important to the local population here, as we can see, often a hive of activity. And both mammal and bird life taking advantage. Helmeted guinea fowl, and I would imagine those are wattled starlings on the right, with a few superb starlings intermingled, usually a few scattered around there. Big old bull, this giraffe on the right. You can see that very, very well developed ossicones. When he was turning side on, look at that huge protuberance, I think that's how you say it, on his forehead. That's a calcium deposit he's got there, usually a good sign of age. But certainly a bigger one than normal, that. Yep. Lovely to see London oryx as well, not things that I normally get to see very often on drives in the area I am. I've got a real thing for the the oryx or the gemsbok down here in southern Africa, out in Namibia, very much synonymous with the dunes there and dry, more arid areas. I think it's just got beautiful markings, and I love their body shape as well. There's something very unique about the body shape of an oryx. Picasso, you're asking who was Jacobson. I'm assuming you're referring to what I was saying about that Jacobson's organ in the roof of the giraffe's mouth. I honestly don't know, Picasso. I'd have to go and find out, but I imagine it's named after the biologist or the scientist who discovered it, as is often the case with these sorts of things. So we know it as the Jacobson's organ or the organ of Jacobson. So I imagine he's probably a very well-known scientist within his field. But I'll see what I can find out. That's a good question, but I know nothing about where he's from or if he did anything else. Let me see if I can have a quick look. It's a good question. We just use that word regularly and in its descriptive form, but don't know too much about actually where it came from. See, isn't the internet wonderful when used for the right thing? Just a quick search. I can tell you that it was named for its discoverer, indeed, who is a Danish anatomist, all the way back in 1811, called Ludwig Levin Jacobsen. I imagine Jacobsen as he's Danish. So we also used to have a Jacobson's organ, we think, thanks to our development of language and the written word and speech. We no longer rely on smell as much as we in society as many other animals do. But there are suggestions that we may have used to have a more evolved organ of Jacobson. I'm going to try and give it its proper name now. But so we just don't use it, so it's become residual over the years. Evolutionarily, it's been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And there are, I believe I'm right in saying that if you actually look at a developing embryo of a human baby, it's fairly obvious. But by the time the embryo comes out or that baby is given birth to, there's almost nothing left of it at all. It sort of develops, and then the body goes, "Oh no, hang on, we don't need that anymore. We won't waste our energy, and we'll reabsorb it and put it into making other parts which are more important." As you can see, the Jacobson's organ being used very regularly by snakes in that very typical darting motion of the tongue coming out, picking up all of those scents in the atmosphere And then, whereas most animals will just have, say, an individual opening of that organ, in snakes they've got a paired opening, and those two tips of the forked tongues are inserted into those openings. Analysis takes place, and the snake is able to detect that, well, there's more of that scent particle on the right or the left, and then knows or uses that information to then hone in on that prey. But generally used for uh, chemical analysis of hormones, particularly to do with social situations like breeding status, aggression, territoriality, mood, but everyone unique, like a fingerprint for each individual animal. Well, thank you, Darkmane Lover. Nice to hear from you as well. Glad you've enjoyed the Waterhole show today and over the last few days, and 365 days a year. It's lovely to be able to share this time with you. And Penelope Kenyon, yeah, also agreeing this waterhole is drying up. I mean, can barely see the water level now. So let's hope that if it is a plumbing problem, that it's something that can get fixed soon. It has been such a popular spot for all of the animals over the last few months. Pinnakin Purahit, I hope I'm saying that correctly. You're saying you'd like to come and stay at this lodge. Yeah, absolutely. Great Plains Conservation, one of their portfolio. It must be a spectacular area, so not an area that I've been fortunate enough to visit as of yet. Well, unfortunately, we're almost out of time, but it's been a very nice, relaxing day today. We've had some lovely sightings on this World Elephant Day. Not as many elephants as we have seen in the past, but lovely to see a few having a bit of a splish splash and a roll around in the water. And say, always great to see some eland and oryx and drinking giraffes. We've had
rhino down at Founders as well as Sable. So we've had some lovely, lovely views. And actually, I enjoyed sort of looking at the doves as well. We don't often get a chance to look at those sorts of things up close on these cameras. But I will probably remember swallowing the fly most out of the last 2 hours. An interesting experience. Maybe I won't need any lunch. But it has been a pleasure to share these views. Oh, hold tight, little giraffe. With you over the last couple of days, or the last 4 days. I'm going to have a little break for a while now. I will be back next weekend, Saturday and Sunday. I will be back with you. But my very, very capable colleagues will be looking after you over the next couple of days. So, yeah, very happy World Elephant Day to everybody. Really hope you've enjoyed the show. Thanks so much for all the questions and comments. I'm going to now try and figure out if I can say the organ of Jakobsen consistently, because I'm fairly sure that will be the Danish pronunciation. But thanks for your participation as always. I hope you've enjoyed it. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully you'll be able to tune in tomorrow for more Live at the Waterhole fun.